Thank you, Jean-Francois, and welcome everyone. Before we get started this afternoon, I want to thank you for this opportunity to come and visit with you about this position. It's one that I feel has a great future with it. I've had the opportunity to visit with some of you today and look forward to visiting with some of the rest of you as the day wears on. To give you an idea of where we're going to go this afternoon, I'm going to talk a little bit about my background, and then I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit about the land grant system, some of the history, and a little bit of the successes and what I see as some of the challenges that are ahead of us. And then I want to talk a little bit about what my vision would be for the University of Arkansas Division of Agriculture if I were the candidate for this position. And then we'll conclude with a little bit about my management style. As far as my background goes, I was born in Oklahoma but raised in southern New Mexico at Las Cruces here at the base of the Oregon Mountains. And I went to college there at New Mexico State University, earning a BS degree in 1972 and a master's in 1974 with a specialization in plant breeding. I worked with alfalfa while there. From there, I went on to earn a PhD in crop science at Oregon State University in 1976 with an emphasis in cool season grass breeding. Then in 1976, I accepted a faculty position at Mississippi State University, and I went through the professorial ranks, staying there until 2006. My appointment there, or at least my initial appointment, as you'll see, it changed some over the years, was an 80% research appointment working in forage grass breeding and a 20% teaching appointment in the area of plant breeding and quantitative genetics. As I mentioned, my research focused on cool season forage grass breeding. The two primary species that I worked with were annual ryegrass and tall fescue. A couple of the successes that came out of that program were Marshall ryegrass, released in 1980. This was a line that had high yield potential, increased cold tolerance, and later maturity, and was well adapted to the Mid-South. Later in 1989, we released Jackson ryegrass. It had many of the characteristics of Marshall, but it also possessed the crown rust resistance that was lacking in Marshall, making this particular line better adapted in the lower South than Marshall was. My teaching responsibilities, as I mentioned, they were in the area of plant breeding. I taught most of the plant breeding courses in the department at one time or another, and then also developed and taught the course in biometrical genetics and plant breeding for about 30 years while I was there, and I mentored some 28 graduate students. Also, during that time, I worked closely with the sorghum breeding program there. This was funded through international work through the INSORMIL program and the MEAC programs at that time. We released almost 400 germplasm lines out of that, and those were co-developed with Dr. Lynn Gorley. Lynn did a lot of international work, spent a lot of time overseas, and had this tendency to accumulate graduate students, then he would send them back home for me to take care of and finish off, so thus the association. But some of the traits that we were working with involved acid soil tolerance, bird resistance, and the brown midrib trait. Also during this time, I worked with the MEAC project on a project in Kenya dealing with sorghum and millet. I had some 6 graduate students come out of Kenya on that project, and their research in country resulted in the release of 4 different millet lines for use in Kenya. Also, I did some work with the cotton program there. During the time that Fred Borland was on faculty at Mississippi State University, he got me interested in some of the plant mapping work that they were doing. And with my interest in data analysis and computer programming, I did some of the early programming associated with the CotMap and TopMap. These were concepts that were later incorporated into what I think you're now using as the Cotman system here in Arkansas. Also, later in my career there, I did some work with the USDA cotton breeding program, and we developed one germplasm in a project funded by Cotton Incorporated. This was a group of very diverse lines developed through a recurrent selection methodology with an aim in mind of trying to break up some major linkage groups in cotton. That was released about 5 years ago. In 1989, I had the opportunity to move to a 3/4 time appointment in the Experimental Statistics Unit of the Experiment Station. I became head of that unit in 1992 upon the retirement of the previous head. And I did statistical consulting for the entire division. It was not just experiment station, but we also serviced education, extension, as well as faculty from several other colleges. I also taught statistical methods for several semesters through an arrangement with the math department. And we were responsible for project and manuscript review within the experiment station as well. And for me, this was really an eye-opener and kind of a watershed in my career. This gave me an appreciation for the big picture. In this particular position, you got to work with all of the different programs within the experiment station. The applied, the basic, the field, the laboratory. But also you got to work with project leaders who were brilliant scientists, and then you had some others who maybe weren't so brilliant. And you got to see the characteristics of very good research programs and characteristics of very poor research programs. And that's been a tremendous asset to me later in my career as I've mentored young faculty. You know which behaviors are good to emulate, and you know which ones are good to avoid. In 2000, I was appointed interim head of the Plant and Soil Sciences Department, which at that time was the largest department at on the MSU campus in terms of number of faculty and budget. We had some 38 faculty and 40 support staff, 175 undergraduates and 75 graduate students, and about a $5 million annual budget. Again, this kind of gave me more of the big picture appreciation of things. This was a department that had undergone 2 mergers in the previous decade, and they were still feeling some of the effects of that, so there were some challenges associated with that. You were also dealing with multi-agency budgets. We answered to 3 different agencies: research, extension, and teaching. I was responsible for all personnel actions in the department. And this gave me a great empathy for the role of department heads. You guys have got one of the toughest jobs in the system. Sometimes you feel like you're in no man's land, that you're not exactly considered part of the faculty, but you're not exactly considered part of the administration, and you may feel like they're shooting at you from both sides. But it's really a rewarding position, and you guys are key to the functioning of a unit of this size. In 2000, I accepted a position as Associate Director for the Mississippi Agricultural and Forestry Experiment Station. My primary responsibilities were for research programs, and also during that time, I served a 6-month stint as an interim head of agricultural and biological engineering, which was an interesting experience in that crossed 2 colleges, agriculture and engineering. Some of my responsibilities there included grants and contracts, research coordination. We were responsible for data reporting, the federal CRIS reports, and the plan of work. I did a lot of work with intellectual property. This included licensing, disclosures, filing of PVPs, etc. I also served as a liaison to a number of external organizations such as Farm Bureau, Soybean Promotion Board, Mississippi Seedsman. I was also responsible for preparing most of our legislative initiative at both the state and federal level. I didn't actually do the lobbying in this role, but we were responsible for developing the initiatives and all the paperwork associated with them. We also had oversight of publications coming out of the experiment station, and I had a role in mentoring new MAFIS faculty, and we developed a new faculty workshop as a part of that. MAFIS, for those of you who are not familiar with it, encompasses some 13 departments that spans 3 different colleges. They have 4 R&E centers representing some 17 research sites statewide. One of the things that we really emphasized in this particular position was grantsmanship and trying to increase our leveraging of funds. Back in about 1990 to 2000, my predecessor, Dr. Nancy Cox, began an effort to try to increase leveraging within the experiment station, and I stepped in about 2002 and took that over. But over that time period, we raised that from where we were bringing in about 40 cents for every appropriated dollar to, by 2004, that was up to $1.10. Some of the milestones during the time that I was there, we saw an increased number of federal competitive grants to USDA, NSF, and NIH, and also an increased number of proposals and awards to non-USDA agencies such as DOE, Department of Interior, Labor, etc. And our peer-reviewed publications reached an all-time high. Then in 2006, I had an opportunity to move to Oklahoma as the Associate Director and Chief Operating Officer for the Oklahoma Agricultural Experiment Station, a position that I've held until today. My responsibilities there, besides the responsibilities that I had in Mississippi, I also assumed responsibility for budget management and allocation, personnel actions, handling the federal budget request, and doing some of the lobbying associated with that, and special projects as assigned by the Vice President for the division. We have 9 comprehensive departments within the experiment station or the Division of Agriculture at Oklahoma State. They're fairly similar to the mix that you have here. I might point out, let's see, this next to the last department, Natural Resource Ecology and Management, this was a new department that was formed shortly after I got there. This was taking the old forestry department, bringing in the range people from plant and soil sciences and some wildlife people from arts and sciences to form a natural resources unit. This particular department has just been going like gangbusters. They're bringing in grants. They brought in some really bright young faculty. Their student numbers are up. They've been able to attract support for a couple of professorships in that department. So it really has been a great success. In terms of our statewide presence, there are 19 research locations in the Oklahoma Ag Experiment Station. Our model is a little different than yours. This is a branch station model. This is not an R&E center model. We don't have a lot of faculty off campus. These are mostly run by master's level people. The actual number of farms is quite a bit higher than that because in this Stillwater location, we've got multiple farms, and there's probably about 10 to 12 separate farms right in that Stillwater area that are encompassed by that location, several of those with their own superintendent. And one thing that we've done during the last 5 years, we've bucked the national trend, where most states have been going through and closing or selling off some of their branch stations to save money. We've actually been expanding. We've added 3 stations during that period. The station here at Valiant is the result of a 2,000-acre bequest that was given to us right along the Red River here, along with an endowment for the place. We also received a 1,000-acre bequest here in Texas County north of Goodville. It is near our station there, prime farmland. And then just recently we've opened a new station at Ardmore, which is about half a mile from the Noble Foundation. This is not your typical station, and this one will actually have faculty associated with it. This one's going to have a very heavy molecular biology component to it. We currently have 3 faculty located there, and we're in the process of finishing construction. We actually opened the building about a month ago. The east wing that you see on the building there is shelled out, but we're in the process of going through and finishing that out now as we've opened up the west wing on this. But this opened just about a month ago. We also deal with interdisciplinary programs in environmental science and international programs, and also 2 colleges, the College of Human Sciences and the College of Veterinary Health Sciences, and I support research in the latter 2 colleges through a series of block grants. We also have some service units. Our field and research service units is responsible for maintaining the branch stations on a statewide basis. We've centralized that operation. We also have an Ag Communications Department and a Foundation Seed Stocks operation. We have 6 centers. The first, the National Institute for Microbial Forensics and Food and Agricultural Biosecurity, NIMFAB as they're called. It's a bit of a mouthful, and I have to think about it every time I mention it, but this has been a very successful group. They've been able to bring in some very large outside grants to help support the operation, and they've been invited into the university's new interdisciplinary science building that just opened last year. Our new Bio-Based Products and Energy Center coordinates energy for our largest research program on the campus, and this is the Biomass Bioenergy program. And we were just informed last week that this particular group is going to receive one of the NIFA Partnership Awards for Mission Integration, and we'll be in Washington in about 2 weeks to accept that award on behalf of this group. We also have a water center that is somewhat similar to the one that you have here, and I was visiting with the director about that a little bit this morning. We've also incorporated the Oklahoma Water Resources Institute into that within the last 6 months. We also have a new product development center. This is a group that works with rural manufacturers. Extension is heavily involved in this through the App Engineer program. Then we also have the Food and Ag Products Center there on campus. It's been around for about a dozen years now. It was established by legislative mandate to help the value-added food industry there in the state do a tremendous job. There's about a dozen faculty associated with that. And then the recently mentioned Institute for Ag and Biosciences. Our primary research focus, probably not drastically different from yours, environmental and natural resources, food products, food safety, economics and social issues, animal production, crop production, and biochemistry and molecular biology. One other thing that we've done in recent years, in 2008, we fired up our television program again. We had had a program a number of years ago called Sun Up that came on early morning. It was about a 10 to 15 minute slot, but had dropped off because there's not much demand for those kinds of programs on TV anymore. Nobody wants that little short clip, and so this had really fallen off the map. We got that started up again in 2008. It runs as a 30-minute program every Saturday morning, and it's repeated on one of the other channels later in the week. It's co-sponsored by the Extension Service and the Ag Experiment Station. Some activities that I do outside of the Ag Experiment Station. I've been a member of the Southern Experiment Station Director since 2000. I was chair of that organization from 2008 to 2009. I've been on the Multi-State Research Committee since 2004, and this is the group that oversees the multi-state research project portfolio for the Southern region. Administrative advisor to several regional projects, and this past year I received the Leadership Award from that particular organization. At the national level, ESCOP, or the Experiment Station Committee on Organization and Policy, is the executive committee for the National Experiment Station Directors Group, or the Experiment Station Section. I was chair of that group in 2009-2010. I was on the Science and Tech Committee for 2 years. I was also on the System Communication and Marketing Committee and chaired that in 2010. And I'll say a little bit more about this particular committee later as we talk about some of the challenges that are ahead of us. I currently serve on the National Research Support Projects Committee, and this oversees national research support projects that are funded through off-the-top federal formula funds by the Experiment Station Directors. And these include programs such as the Minor Use Pesticide Program, the Minor Use Drugs for Animals, the Potato Germplasm Bank. We also support some of the information data systems within the CRIS system. With this, there's also an atmospheric deposition project, an animal genome project, and a couple of others. I also am now the ESCOP rep on the new Partnership Principles Joint Committee requested by Undersecretary Kathy Witecki to see what we can do to kind of revitalize the partnership between NIFA and the land-grant universities. It frankly has just kind of fallen into disrepair a little bit in recent years, and she's very much interested in trying to revitalize that, get some communication going where it's been a little bit lacking recently. I also serve as the director of the South Central Sun Grant Center at Oklahoma State, and currently I'm serving as chair of the National Sun Grant Association. This particular organization manages regional grant programs in bioenergy area with funds from USDOT, DOE, and USDA. Just to kind of give you an idea of the scope of the Sun Grant, this shows some of the project locations. We're responsible for those within the South Central region right here. And I think a few of your scientists are involved in some of those. We're also part of the Oklahoma Bioenergy Center, a state-funded organization consisting of ourselves, the University of Oklahoma, and the Noble Foundation. This was authorized by the state at $40 million, of which we've received 14 so far before the economy went south, but hopefully that's going to get revitalized in the near future. One of the things that I really like to work on is trying to build the grant and contract portfolio of the institution. And we took a number of measures to try to increase this, and during the time that I've been there, we've been able to almost double that. I can't take all the credit for this because the faculty are really the ones who do it. You give them the tools and the motivation to do it, but at the end of the day, they are really the ones who do the work on this. During that same time period, we've also seen an increase in the research expenditures within the experiment station. And something I'd like to point out from that, and this is probably similar to what you're seeing here, look at what's happening to the role of state funds here. It's not that state funds have really shrunk that much, it's just that the other parts of the pie are growing to the point that now state funds are a little less than half of our research expenditures because we've been able to grow these other sectors. This has been relatively flat in terms of actual dollars. In terms of where we stand within the research community, we are the largest research unit on the campus. This last year we did about 32% of the research on campus, and that will go up as high as 38% in some years, but we're about twice as large as any other unit on the campus. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about vision. And to do this, let's take a little historical perspective here and go back and consider the Morrill Act that formed the land grant system. This was really a watershed in public education here in the United States. It opened up education to the masses, and it envisioned really a Renaissance education. If you read that, it wasn't just about agricultural and mechanic arts, but they said not accepting the classics. They viewed a broad-based education like the comprehensive universities that we have today. Then the second part of that mission came about in 1887 with the passage of the Hatch Act, sponsored by Congressman William Henry Hatch of Missouri. And what Hatch envisioned was an economic development agency. And if you go back and look at the language of the Hatch Act, you find that he called for the establishment and maintenance of a permanent and effective agricultural industry, research on agriculture in its broadest aspects, and improvement of rural life and consumer welfare. And those statements are as relative today as they were when they framed this language. The only difference being we're probably working in broader areas than they even envisioned. If you consider genomics, nanotechnology, some of the various things that we're working on today. And then the third part of that came about in 1914 with the passage of the Smith-Lever Act. We've done the workforce training through education, we've done the research, but how do we get this out into the user community so it's going to do some good? This formed the technology transfer arm of things for taking that information out to the user groups. And we formed the land grant partnership that we have today. And this is what really makes us unique on a college campus. Every other college does education and research, but how many have an extension service associated with it? We're the full service. We do it from cradle to grave. They get through the research, but then kind of fall short a little bit on the technology transfer side of things. And so we really need to capitalize on this expertise and this pipeline that we have here. What about the success of the land grant system? Well, in terms of an economic development agency, consider that in 1862, when the Morrill Act was passed, we were 30 million people. We were largely a rural society. 60% of our population was involved in agricultural employment. Skip forward 150 years or so, and 300 million people or more, and only 2% are in agricultural employment, and we have an ample food supply. Definitely a success. There have been other measures to try to measure the success of this enterprise. Huffman and Evanson looked at agricultural productivity versus the investment in agricultural research, or the public investment in agricultural research, and found that there was a tremendous increase in productivity between 1948 and 2000, despite the fact that funding for public agricultural research had remained relatively flat during that period. They went on to calculate that between 1970 and 2000, there was an annualized rate of return on that public investment of 56%, compared to the Standard & Poor over that same time period was 8.5%. Pretty good investment. But to look at some other studies, a recently published USDA ERS study looked at some 27 studies that have been done in the last decade or so, looking at the return on investment in public agricultural research, and they found that the majority of the studies estimated this to be somewhere between 20 to 60% per year. Just to look at it graphically, you can see the vast majority of the studies are in that 20 to 40 or 40 to 60 range. Very few below that, very few above that. In terms of successes, we've improved the health and nutrition by providing nutritious foods and safe foods for our population. We've provided a cleaner environment through reduced pesticide use, more efficient methods. We've built stronger communities through our rural development efforts. We've improved the efficiency of food and fiber production. We've added value to the products being produced. We've extended shelf life. We've helped to control foodborne diseases. We've added nutritive value to our products. Food availability and variety in this country are at an all-time high. And even with the recent increases in food prices worldwide, food prices in this country are still a bargain, and we're the envy of the world. This has had some other consequences. We've improved the quality of life for the rural population. We've given them more free time through these more efficient methods. We've increased educational levels. We've improved health, and we've allowed them to shift to a more urban population. We've also exported our technology to other nations. Other nations have modeled their agricultural research organizations after us, and a good example of that would be Embrapa in Brazil. They've taken our model of USDA and perfected it, if anything. They've actually surpassed us in many respects. So, why is it that today we are struggling to try to get support for agricultural research? With all the successes we've had, you know, it looks like we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, but now we're discovering that it may be another train. Well, part of the problem here is that we've been a victim of our own success. Some of the things that we have done have had some unintended consequences. Not bad, but unintended. We have shifted from being largely a rural to being an urban population. We've shifted from being a nation largely of producers to a nation of consumers. We're seeing an aging farm population, wondering where we're going to get the people to replace these people as they retire. We're developing a population that is several generations removed from the farm, and they have a lack of knowledge of where their food supply is coming from. And they have shifting priorities. Food for survival is no longer job one with some of these people. And so we find ourselves in a situation where we need to be able to sell the value of the ag experiment station to a changing population. We have fewer producers in the legislature and in Congress. Most states are seeing this shift to a more urban legislature. We need the support of producer organizations if we're going to succeed here. We're also going to have stakeholder input because they're involved in this as much as we are. Our big problem over the years has been we're a tremendous success story, but we haven't done a particularly good job of telling our story. In some ways, we've kind of assumed that there's going to be a reward for good behavior, and that hasn't always been the case. We do a fair job of documenting some of our successes. We release a new variety, we develop a new technology, a new insecticide. We get that information out. But the one area we haven't really done a good job with, we've not kept the public well informed of what are the consequences of not maintaining a secure food supply. And we could take a lesson from medical research. Medical research has been tremendously successful, and they've been very successful at keeping their program funded and at catching the public eye. Yeah, they publish their success stories. We've cured polio, we've cured smallpox, but there's a darker side out here. We've still got heart disease and diabetes and cancer and respiratory diseases, and if we don't treat these in the absence of these other things, they're going to get you. And we don't tell that story about agriculture very well. What happens if we have a food shortage? If we don't have enough people to produce? If we have a major environmental disaster? We've not done a particularly good job of keeping the public's interest in this. I mentioned the SCOP extension, or the Communication and Marketing Committee that I served on. That is part of an effort by the National Experiment Station directors to try to get our message out to the general public. We're not talking about the things that Ag Communications do, and they do a marvelous job, but we're primarily preaching to the choir, going to farm press publications and the like. We're trying to get things that'll be USA Today, Huffington Post, Congressional Quarterly, to reach out to some of those members of Congress who can affect our appropriations, but they may not necessarily be allies of ours, not because they dislike us, but they just don't know what we do. So we're trying to get our message out to some of those people that are not being reached. And we've hired a marketing firm out of Washington to work with our lobbying firm to help develop this effort. Again, we all have ag communications departments, but this really goes beyond that arena. So we've had to bring in some professionals. Is it doing any good? Well, we'd like to think it's doing some good, but it's really a drop in the bucket. We all need to be involved in this effort. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in this area to get our message out there. Is there need for ag experiment stations today? Well, I think so. Population's increasing. They say it will be 9 billion by 2050. Who's going to produce the food to feed these people if we don't develop the technology to help them do it? Environmental concerns, changing agricultural policy, a new farm bill every 4 years, new trade agreements. Our farmers are working in an ever-changing environment. We're not just marketing locally anymore, we're marketing in a global market. What's the effect of these disrupted economies on our agriculture? And what are the effects of some of the changing demographics that we're seeing today? Now, we can't emphasize the message of food security enough. A nation that can't feed itself is extremely vulnerable, and it becomes as big an issue of national security, I would argue, even as energy is. Also, one of the challenges, agriculture is a major economic driver in many states. It is here in Arkansas, it is in Oklahoma, it was in Mississippi. One of the things that we noticed in Mississippi after Hurricane Katrina, what was the first industry to really bounce back in that part of the state? Agriculture, because it is so resilient. Here in Oklahoma, as the recession began to end, what was the industry that was leading us out of the recession in Oklahoma? Agriculture. And so this is a major economic driver, and we can't afford to have disruptions in this. So we find ourselves in a situation we need to expand the scope of our work to address the concerns of the urban sector to catch their interest, while at the same time continuing to provide support to the production sector. We've got to help our producers be more globally competitive through increased production, reducing the cost of inputs, adding value to their products, helping to shape agricultural policy, marketing, and consumer acceptance. We also are going to have to form more partnerships in the future. As problems become larger and more complex and funds become tighter, it's difficult for one organization to be able to do everything. So we're going to have to go out and find those strategic partnerships that complement our skill sets, that can bring resources to the table, and that may be able to reach some audiences that we cannot reach. Now, I'm going to quickly run through just what I see as some research areas that we're going to have to address as we go forward in the future. I won't spend a lot of time on these. They align pretty closely with the NIFA priorities and also the ESCOP science roadmap. Probably the biggest issue we're going to face over the next decade or two is going to be water use, both water quality and quantity, and competing uses for recreation, agriculture, industry, drinking water. Some of the biggest advances we've made in agriculture in recent years have been the result of biotechnology and molecular biology, and that's not likely to change. This also provides a very rich source of funding for some of our scientists and will be a driver of our programs. There continues to be a big interest in bio-based products and bioenergy. Recent developments by the Department of Defense in interest in developing aviation biofuels and marine diesel from biosources is spurring interest in this area. Environmental issues will continue to be a problem, whether it be air quality, water quality, erosion control, animal waste management. The use of technology in agriculture, such as sensors, precision ag, variable rate technology, the use of medical imaging technology. Food safety. Food safety continues to pop up as a major issue in the newspapers. Most of you will remember the E. coli outbreak that occurred in spinach several years ago. The E. coli outbreak in Europe recently attributed to sprouts. Recently I just saw that there's a listeria outbreak in cantaloupe that's a few people have died from. The mad cow disease that cut off a lot of our imports into the Orient. Not only the human health aspect of this, but the economic disruption that goes with it. We're going to have to look at new crops. Sometimes it's going to be new crops for new uses, or in some cases maybe new uses for old crops, such as ethanol production from sweet sorghum. Biosecurity. We need to be able to protect our resources from the threat of bioterrorism, or in the case of outbreaks that are natural in occurrence or perhaps due to negligence, we need to be able to track these to the source very rapidly so that we can cut them off and begin remedial measures to help these industries begin to recover. Economic development could be anything from new crops, value added, rural revitalization. Another area that resonates with the urban public, horticulture and turf grass. Turf grass, the green industry, specialty crops, specialty vegetables and fruits, all of these are growing in importance and interest to that urban audience. Production agriculture, we will still have to continue to help our producers increase yield and gain, reduce input, increase efficiency, and add value. Natural resources will continue to be of utmost importance, be it forestry, range, wildlife, fisheries, and looking for alternative economic enterprises on some of our unused lands. When I left Mississippi, this was one of the most, I'd say Farm Bureau was most excited about this particular program in alternative economic enterprises. This looked at use of marginal lands for hunting camps, fishing, bird watching for a fee, but it gave an additional source of income, and many of our producers were probably generating more income from this type of thing than they were from their traditional cropping systems. Also, post-harvest processing, what can we do to help preserve our products, increase shelf life, add value? Agricultural economics and policy, again, with ever-changing world trade agreements, new farm bills, environmental regulations. This is a moving target for our producers, and we need to be able to help them to navigate these waters. And weather. Whether you consider this climate change or you consider it short-term weather variations, they can be extremely serious in nature. Right now in Oklahoma, we're going through a very severe drought that estimated will drop agricultural production by $1 billion this year, and the figure's even higher down in Texas. So we need to be able to develop tools to help our farmers cope with this when it occurs and to predict weather events more in advance. As we go into the future, you could look at research as a pipeline. We need to keep a balanced approach to things, and we need to keep our pipeline full, starting with the basic research, taking that to the applied or translational research, handing that off to Extension, who can then pass that on to the consumer. This is a joint research and extension effort, but let us not forget about education. The basic and applied research, as well as the extension activities, all provide ample opportunities for graduate student education and the training of students, as well as undergraduate research opportunities. Some of the challenges that we face, we've got to provide the resources to allow our faculty to be able to handle this. We've got to have those engaged faculty. They have to need or have the facilities to work in and the equipment and technology to do their job. And the 500-pound gorilla in the room is funding, needed not only for operating, but you can't have the first three without the last one. We've got to be able to maintain those base funds. This is our bread and butter. These are the state and federal appropriations used primarily to support faculty. They provide for the continuity. They allow for some infrastructure development. Also, some of those are earmarked to allow for multi-state collaboration. One of the challenges that we face as we go into the future, because those funds have been rather static, we're going to see more dependence on external funds for research. And in that case, who sets our research agenda? And how do we marry that up to our land grant mission? Also, we're going to have to look at more multi-state and integrated projects to help extend our resources in this tight environment. These offer great opportunities for networking and professional development, and they also help to make you more competitive for external grants. And we've got to show strength in that competitive funding arena. I would argue that it makes a great case for continued formula funding. If we can show Congress that if you'll give us $1, we can go out and raise $1 or $2 of grant funds for every dollar that you give us, we can show the value of the investment. And I think it also improves the quality of science through the peer review process. What about the future of the Ag Experiment Station? This was a shot that was taken after Katrina, and I thought about this and think, well, where are we going? Are we on a stairway to nowhere, or are we on a stairway to the stars? I would like to think that we're on the stairway to the stars. Now I'd like to shift a little bit and talk about my vision for the Division of Ag here if I were the chosen candidate. I would like to see the Division of Ag recognized as a leader and an innovator in ag research. To do that, you're going to have to recruit the best new faculty, and you're going to have to be competitive for external funding. To do that, we're going to have to provide resources such as grant writing training, providing service both pre and post award, and things that can incentivize grantsmanship among the faculty. I would also hope that it would be an organization with a balanced portfolio of funds to include capacity or base funds, grants, commodity funds, contracts, self-generated funds such as fees and sales, royalties, gifts, and endowments. We mentioned the capacity funds. This is really our bread and butter. We've got to keep these going because they support most of our personnel costs. Growth potential of these, to be honest with you, is probably modest at best over the next few years, particularly until we get this federal budget deficit situation under control. Grants. We've always looked to USDA as our prime source, and I think we still continue to look to USDA. We probably need to branch out and look at some other agencies besides just NIFA, Forest Service, ERS, etc. But consider that agriculture is one of the smallest budgets in the federal government, and only a small fraction of that goes toward research, education, and extension. So you're competing for a very small pie. And the outside world is being encouraged more and more to apply for those funds. So it's not just an internal competition anymore. So we really need to look at more non-traditional sources where possible, such as NSF, NIH, DOE, DOI, and so forth. This is a potential growth area. This has been a big growth area for us at Oklahoma State. These types of collaborations tend to foster innovation and cross-fertilization among the disciplines, And another advantage, many of these other agencies, unlike USDA, return full IDCs, which can also go back to help support the research enterprise. We can't forget about these other sources of funding either, the commodity groups, contracts, and so forth. But these funds tend to benefit certain programs. They tend to benefit the applied research that many of our producer groups are demanding. But they also come with some strings attached in some cases, and particularly contracts, and we need to weigh those carefully to see which ones that we're willing to accept and which ones may be a violation of our primary mission. We're going to have to look at enhanced partnerships with other colleges, other universities, and other federal agencies. I would also envision seeing more recognition for our faculty in terms of refereed publications, grants and contracts, patents, awards, both at the local and national level, seeing more fellows of professional societies. I would also like to see that the experiment station could help to provide the resources to promote this industry. Startup packages, grant writing workshops, mentoring, seed funds, support staff, facilities. And I would like to see it be an organization that's recognized for quality research and integrity and unbiased reporting. I would also like to see it as an organization that had a balanced portfolio of research between applied and basic research and between regionally and nationally focused research. I would also envision a close working relationship between the three missions of the land-grant system: education, research, and extension. And this is what really makes us unique. We need to capitalize on this uniqueness. Now a little bit about my administrative philosophy. How do I go about these things? I believe in providing leadership and guidance, but not in a dictatorial manner. I put this up here because I think sometimes faculty view administration like this as the 500-pound gorilla, and we're really not that tough. Sometimes we'd like to think we are, but a pussycat might be a better analogy. I think we have to have stakeholder involvement. We have to get their input. We need to get their buy-in, and we need to get their support. And what do I mean by stakeholders? Well, I mean anybody who's affected by our enterprise. That could be the citizens of Arkansas, the legislature, members of Congress, producers, faculty and staff, students, and the members of the greater University of Arkansas family. Stakeholder input is valuable to anybody because it helps us to maintain focus and keep from straying from the path. I also view this as a job where I have a service responsibility. I'm there to help faculty do their job, to be a liaison to producers, faculty, and sponsors, to help secure base funding from the legislature or from Congress, to promote grantsmanship activities, to be a morale booster, to be your champion and advocate, and to provide the sponsored program activities that you need to be successful. I'm a firm believer in communication. In today's world, with all of the means of communication that we've got available, there's no excuse for not staying in good communication. And I think one of the most overlooked parts of communication is listening. I like to consider myself a good listener, and most people, no matter how mad they may be, one of the main things they want is to hear their viewpoint heard. It's amazing how far just listening to somebody can go towards solving a problem. Doesn't necessarily solve all of it, but it can go a long way, just giving people that opportunity to express opinions. I believe in informed decision making. I'm not one to rush to judgment. I like to gather the facts and then make judgment. I can make decisions in a hurry. There are certain situations where emergencies come up. I can do that. But where there's time, I like to gather the facts and make sure that we make the right decision rather than make the wrong decision and have to go back and backtrack on that. I believe in operating in a climate of openness, but I would argue that openness is a two-way street. If I'm going to be open with you, I expect you to be open with me. I believe in management through the department heads and resident directors. I very seldom go directly to faculty without bringing the department head in, or at least letting them know that I'm doing that, and I expect them to reciprocate. It's just good protocol. And don't micromanage. You hired good people, let them do their job. Micromanagement is probably one of the most inefficient methods of managing things that I can think of. Not only does it waste my time, it wastes your time, and it's demeaning to the people who are being micromanaged. I also believe in observing the chain of command. It's just good protocol. Let your superiors know what you're doing. Let those intermediaries know what's going on so people don't get blindsided. Show professional courtesy here. Now, there are obviously times when you may have to violate. If you've discovered that your boss has just embezzled $1 million and he's got a gun in his desk, we might could leave him out that time. But generally, I think it's good to follow a chain of command. I would rather work with you as a member of the team rather than you feel like you're working for me. I place a great deal of emphasis on being a team player in myself as well as others. You know, as an organization, we need to be able to speak with one voice. You know, to quote Ben Franklin, if we don't all hang together, we shall surely all hang separately. Or perhaps to put it another way, as Pogo did several years ago, we've met the enemy and he is us. It's very important that we be on the same page. We don't necessarily have to agree, but we need to be speaking the same message. In terms of accessibility, I maintain an open door policy. I do ask that you contact my assistant before coming, because no sense you walking all the way across campus to find out that I'm in a meeting for the rest of the day. I believe in being proactive about situations, not reactive. Deal with problems before they become problems. Generally, when you get in the reactive stage, it's already too late. I believe in accountability in terms of reporting, financial management, and property control. I believe in motivating rather than dictating. I'm more of a carrot than a stick individual. If I can motivate you to do something, get you to want to do it, we're both going to be happier with the result. And the goals and the well-being of the organization are my primary goals. Because if you look good, I look good. You look bad, I look bad. And I'm going to leave you with one thought. And this goes back to an article that was in the Oklahoma paper a few months ago. One of our newly elected members of Congress was reminiscing about his first days in Washington and how disappointed he had been that it just seemed like everybody was complaining about problems, but nobody wanted to talk about solutions. They just wanted to talk about all the problems. And I thought, well, that might be very apropos for this situation. I would like us to be known as an organization not researching problems, but developing solutions. And with that, I will conclude. Thank you, and be glad to take your questions. Okay. Okay. Yes. Well, it's something that you need to study well before doing it. Not all matches are compatible. I've seen it done a couple of different ways where they have taken the time and they have tried to find disciplines that are compatible. It's worked fairly well. If you just try to mash people together to save money, it doesn't work too well. I think there are times that we have to do it for either financial reasons, or sometimes academics becomes a driver of this. In fact, more times than not, I've found that academics was the major driver. The degree production had gone down to the point that The regents were thinking of taking away a degree program, and in order to save the department, we had to merge them to get enough critical mass and enough degrees to be able to preserve the program. And those sometimes were not always the most compatible matches. I think where we can preserve those traditional departments, we should try to do so, but there comes a time when you have to consider that for financial or educational reasons. But if you do it, you need to study it, you need to get buy-in and input from the faculty before you do it, and then make your decision and move forward. But it's not always an easy decision. Yes. Yes. Okay. The question is, how are we going to be able to attract new young faculty in the coming decade as the baby boomers begin to retire? There are a lot of vacancies available, but the financial resources may not necessarily be available. I think this is going to take some strategic planning on our part, but consider this: as the baby boomers begin to retire, most of these are individuals that are near the end of their career. They're higher paid individuals, and as they leave, we can begin to replace them with junior faculty who may not be making as much money right at the start. So there is a temporary savings there, and so we may be able to fill some of these vacancies in that way. I'm not completely gloom and doom about the funding outlook. We have been able, through efforts at the national and the state level, to preserve some of our formula funds. In fact, we've actually been able to grow our formula funds over the last 4 or 5 years at the national level, particularly the Hatch funds. So there is some opportunity to grow. Most of the states are beginning to recover. Arkansas seems to be in pretty good shape. Oklahoma's in very good shape right now. They've been in recovery mode since February of 2010. And looks like we are starting to see a little bit of additional monies coming into the Treasury. But we're not likely to be able to do mass hiring, a lot of new positions, but we're going to have to strategically replace those older faculty who retire. But I think there is opportunity here. But we may not necessarily want to come back with the same position that we've had for the last 50 years. We may want to direct that into some newer area. Yes.
Sort of a follow-up to that new area, and given your national perspective and this and maybe coming along, do you see any mass in the state of Arkansas for special kind of research facilities programs, much like the academic security facilities, be able to take advantage of the opportune timing of money, interest,
Yes, I think there's some opportunities out there. Well, before we get started, let me repeat the question. The question is, are there opportunities out there to develop a program within Arkansas that is similar to the biosecurity program that we developed at Oklahoma State that took advantage of partly a hot button issue and some faculty expertise that we had? Yes, I think there are opportunities to do that. I do need to let you know a little bit of how that developed. It really revolved around the faculty, and one faculty member in particular that came to us with an idea for this concept of a biosecurity center. Very dynamic individual. She sold us on the program. We put a little bit of seed money with that. We were kind of fortunate in terms of timing in that we had some of these outbreaks of related to food safety at that time, which helped to further spur the interest in this. It also caught the imagination of the other side of campus, and they bought into it, agreed to put some positions on the table. We were then later able to take that program forward and get some federal agencies, particularly Department of Homeland Security and FBI, to buy into that concept. And as we brought the new faculty on board with that, they've now been able to go out and get some fairly large grants through NSF, NIFA, and so forth. And while not entirely self-supporting, they're much better supported than many of our programs. And I think there are opportunities there, but we really need for the faculty to come forward with those ideas. And certainly timing doesn't hurt, but you can't do a whole lot about that. But I do think there are opportunities there. But it really revolves around your faculty and particular expertise that you have that no one else has, or that they're not really capitalizing on. Yeah. What's that? Well, I would like to see a lot of exciting things going on here. I think you've got tremendous potential. I think there's a lot going on over here. Don't sell your program short. You've got a great faculty. I know you've got a great leadership team. I've known a lot of these guys for years. There are opportunities here. And I don't look at this as you guys have got a problem and I need to come in here and fix it. I kind of take the attitude, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But I think you have a lot of opportunities. Maybe you just need a little help in honing some of those skills and opportunities. It's a great area to live in. You've got a tremendous ag industry here. I think you actually have a bigger ag industry than we do, and ours is very well supported by the producer groups. Yours is as well, except that I think you have more of them. So with the kind of support that you have the potential for here, if you can get these stakeholders going to Washington, working with the state legislature, we can grow the enterprise. So I think there is tremendous potential here. I'm not dissatisfied with Oklahoma. I have been able to accomplish a lot since I've been there. Not everything that I set out to do, but that seldom happens with a job. But I would welcome a new challenge. And I think this would be a great environment in which to do it. Okay, thank you.